What is up, everybody? Welcome to the TDR Devy Show. Today, we're talking 2026 rankings. It's been kind of blah out there in the 2026 land, but we're going to talk about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, going over all of the class as a whole. Then we're going to go into draft picks. So if you play Dynasty, we're going to be talking about what are these things getting valued at, give you some actionable advice over there on the Dynasty side. Like, hey, should you be moving these guys? Here's some trades that have been happening in leagues that we like, maybe that we don't like, but overall, just the 2026 class is not the 27 class, which is really, really good right now, just projected wise, the incoming freshmen. This group of sophomores has struggled. And like going through this list and kind of looking at it, you really get a full takeaway of like, oh my gosh, this is as a class is bad. With the caveats, there's some players out there that definitely could take some bigger roles and have that happen for them. But the one thing I will say about this class, and the one thing that you got to understand about this class, is that we just looked at this as 2026 guys. So there are going to be some guys that come back to school. So that's going to help out this class. So one thing to note about this practice is we just said, hey, are they eligible for 2026 class? That's it. Then we took them. There's always going to be those fourth-year running backs that Jay loves so much. There's going to be some those wide receivers that also can come out, or the quarterbacks. I think the quarterbacks that don't necessarily come out in the 25 class is going to prop up the 26 class, but it's still gross. Like, so when we get into these guys, we're going to be talking about it, and just hang out here on the channel. All right, let's start with the quarterbacks, the position that everybody loves in Superflex. So really, this is just a combination of me and Jay. Jay kind of put the list together. I moved some guys around. We're pretty close on a lot of these guys, vice versa, in terms of where our values are. Right now, we got Arch Manning sitting at QB1. QB2 is Nico from Tennessee. I'm a lot of I don't know how to say his last. I'm going to try it more and more. I promise I'll get it. But Nico's sitting there at QB2. And then I'm gonna tell you what, I don't know about Jay's process here. After that, it's like I don't know. It's really where you're gonna slot in some 25 guys that go back to school, like Garrett Nussmeier, some of those other guys that possibly come back, where you're like, yeah, I feel comfortable in that tier. And then there's kind of a tier break. There's Jackson Arnold, who had got benched this year and then is now back to the starter and hasn't looked amazing. Lenore Sellers from South Carolina has potential, has upside. Not a great thrower of the football, which at the quarterback position you need. Now, he can get there, but he's definitely raw. Best of the rest in terms of the list that we had, Jaden Rashada, Avery Johnson, Sam Levitt, Aiden Childs, and then Dante Moore. But some of those guys haven't even played yet in terms of Dante Moore. He played his freshman year, not there at Oregon. A lot of question marks in this list here. What's your overall takeaway from the list in itself, Jay?
I think that's it. I think there's a lot of question marks here in this list. One thing that I would say is that in the few games that we saw out of Arch Manning, I think we were a bit surprised at how well he did. And he looked good on a lot of those metrics. So I'm excited about Arch Manning. I really do think he's a clear-cut 1.01 for this class so far as what we're doing. But the list in the whole really does feel like a lot of question marks, where there was some in the beginning of the season, you had Nico and Jackson starters. There was so much potential, so much. We were so excited for this, and it's been a little bit of a letdown this season. And so even Lenore Sellers, there were points where he looked really good, and there's been points where it hasn't looked that great. When you look at all the metrics this season, there's nobody really standing out. And really, I was hoping to have Nico and Jackson really take off this year. And that makes them not surefire guys yet. And we're going to need them to perform well throughout the second half this season. And then going into next year, they really got to take a step up for me to get really, really excited. And I do think what you mentioned, so like let's say we get Nussmeier to come back, or one of these other guys, Drew Aller, to come back. Any of these 3-year guys that might come out this year come back, and then they beef up this class, and then you get a little bit more excited about what this class could be. But the difference between this class and the 2025 class is this class, what we're looking at, Arch, Nico, Jackson, those are some good underclassmen that have the potential to be first-round picks. And then you sprinkle in all those older classmen. The 2025 class, it's going to be all upperclassmen. So it's all going to be 5th, 6th-year guys. Most of those guys will be 5th, 6th-year guys. Some 4th. So, there's just a little bit of different. There is some guys in this class that could come out, and they just need to perform really good next year and take that next step. And I'm excited about Arch. I really am. I think he's going to be pretty good, and I'm excited to see how that plays out. Hopefully he gets the start at Texas next year, and Quinn comes out this year, but we'll see how that all plays out. But I am really excited about what Arch can be and what that means for Superflex QB potential there.
Listen, if Quinn comes back, there's absolutely no way he's going back to Texas. This is Archie's show next year. Like, I'd be surprised there. I think the question you have, and what we are going to do, we're going to profile these guys, a couple of them per group, is what is Arch, when you think of Arch Manning, and what is he going to be a 3-year guy, whereas next year you're for sure coming out? Or the whole process has been with his family is like, no, he's 4 years. He's going to stay there. He's going to develop. So there's also that. There's also that chance that he doesn't come out until his senior year. And in this class gets a little bit even less deep there, because if he's your Superflex 101, which he would be in this class at this point, he would be the guy I would take at 101. That would definitely put a shock to it, right? And when you look at him this year, from just a raw numbers perspective, he's 6'4", 225. He's a true sophomore. 920 yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He has those 3 rushing touchdowns. He could scoot a little bit. Not calling him dual threat. I know we're not doing that, but he can scoot a little bit more than his uncles. And we saw that. And I think from just from a throwing of the football standpoint, what he was able to come in and kind of lead Texas, those wins that he was able to do, he showed potential, like much more than he had 2 years ago. As a prospect, he was one of those guys that 2 years ago was like, whoa, he's got to develop a little bit. I think he went to the perfect situation. He's learning at Texas. Sark is amazing. So he's developed. Those weapons are going to be great. Even next year, even if they lose Isaiah Bond and some of these other guys, Matthew Golden, that crew coming in, him and Ryan Wingo and some of these other guys that are coming out, like that's going to be good for Arch's development. So yeah, I think what he's been able to show, it is limited though, right? He's only played 6 games the last 2 years. So he still needs to develop. And we've seen that. We look at Anthony Richardson. He's struggling right now in the NFL. Not to say that they're the same passer, because they are, but you need those reps. You really need those starts. So that's where it makes me think he's going to be coming back for another year after next year, unless he just goes ball busters. I think there's also who's picking at the top. We've seen the Mannings kind of dictate where they go. I don't think they want him to go to Carolina with that owner. So like, it really kind of depends also kind of where those draft picks are.
Yeah, and that would be, I think, a huge blow to this class. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think quarterbacks that stay that 4th year is not a killer in the process at all. It actually might help them develop and be a better quarterback in the NFL. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. The way that my model works, it would prefer the underclassmen. But some of the stats that I wanted to just highlight this year in 2024, given his limited starts there that he's had, he had an 80.8 adjusted completion percentage in this year so far. So that's if you filter out all the guys that haven't played very much, and that's 4th in college football for adjusted completion percentage. That's really good. It's a fairly accurate quarterback. He's 3rd in yards per attempt, and he's 1st in adjusted yards per attempt. So like that's pretty good for a QB. Those are some of the stats that I'm looking for. And EPA per play, so expected points added per play, he's 1st. Mm-hmm. So these are really good stats that really stand out in the stuff that I look for. 1st in EPA per play, 3rd in adjusted yards per attempt. So these are great stats for a quarterback, and this is exactly the kind of profile that you're looking for. These nuggets, even though he's not getting the start, when he does get on the field and when he does play, he puts up these great metrics that you really look for. These nuggets that you need to have. And then it just makes his profile even better. Even though he wasn't getting the starts, he does show these nuggets throughout the season.
Yeah, no, he has. He's shown it, and I think he's a perfect fit for that offense. So to me, yeah, he's sitting there 101. You're pretty happy with that. Nico has had an up and down year. He looked great at the beginning of the year. We really saw kind of his potential, his arm strength. He does have rushing upside a little bit. I'm not saying he's dual threat. Don't quote me there, but he can scoot a little bit on the ground and make it when he needs to. But the sophomore quarterback, 6'6", 215, definitely not big enough for Jay yet. We got to get some weight on him. He's got to get down there, eat some food down there. But on the season, 108 for 170, 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I think the key thing with him is those interceptions and just some bad throws. I think the defense has started figuring him out in the middle of the year. As soon as the schedule got a little tougher, I think that with Nico, you have to look at that from that perspective. But when you're looking at overall, they are back in terms of like, the playoff contention, all of that. So that's part of it when you're looking at this. Like he's looked really good. Obviously, this is through 7 games, and he played this last weekend. But I love the fact that Nico had bounced back in that win. They look like they're back in the playoff contention possibly. And hey, can they get in there?
Yeah, and from my perspective, he's not really hitting these adjusted metrics that I'm looking for in year 2. So it's not like he's not like showing me the nuggets that I need to see for a year 2. But the thing is he's getting the experience in. He's getting those dots on the board. And then so next year, hopefully you have a little bit more experience, and then things start to click, and you have your year. And my hope is that next year that he has that year. But we talked about Arch having an 80% adjusted completion percentage, and Nico's in this 70 range. I'd love to see that above 75 as sort of like a threshold or qualifier. He's got a whole bunch of pass yards. He's got 9 TDs. The big time throw percentage is 5.4%, and the turnover worthy play percentage is 3%. So he's putting up good big time throws, and the what I would like to see is just that turnover worthy play percentage is right on the fringe. I'd love to see that a little bit lower than 3% going forward. And you mentioned that too, and it's just one little thing that you're working on. And then love to see his adjusted yards per attempt up a bit more for the year. But, overall, there's a lot of potential here, and I think that's why we have him here up this high, and why we're profiling him. But just really, if this is the best guy we got, and he's really not hitting on much anything, that is a little bit concerning for the class as a whole. The hope is that we have a whole bunch of players just go off next year. Maybe a changing of the guard, but right now there aren't very many slivers of hope, and I do agree there's tons of potential here for Nico, and there's a lot of experience that he's gaining this year, and the hope is just next year he takes off.
Yeah, I mean, beating Alabama, even though it's a different Alabama team than Saban being there, obviously he is at home, so that was a great win there. But he's got a big game against Georgia, right? So if we see that improvement and we see that kind of going there, yeah, he could shoot up back into that mold of like, hey, two quarterbacks in this draft class right now where you're like, hey, these are first round picks in like a fantasy draft. But they're right there. But after that, I mean, Jackson has struggled. Lenore's has struggled. Those guys have really struggled there. I will say there's hope, though, for this class over at the running back position. So we're going to jump over to the 2025 running backs. All right, let's jump into the running backs. 2026 running back class here. Justice Haynes at number 1. We're going to get some looks on that one, but that is based on potential. I think that is one of those things is like he still has value and potential. Alabama running backs out there have been it's been tough. Jam Miller and him, that offense has been kind of suspect at most. Darius Taylor, Minnesota running back, who I'm pretty higher on. I kind of moved him up a little bit in the rankings that Jay gave me. Jeremiah Love is a guy that I think we need to talk about from Notre Dame, running back there. And then CJ Baxter is still in our top 4. He is coming off the ACL knee injury that knocked him out for the year, but he is very talented. Like as a true freshman, he showed signs like, hey, this kid can scoot a little bit and go. Best of the rest, there's a lot of them. So I'm going to get through them. You bear with me here. Roderick Robinson, Caleb Jackson, Quentin Joyner, Dante Dowdle, Abu Sama III, Cameron Seldon, Ruben Owens, who is also injured for the year, Caden Fegan, who is also injured for the year, LJ Martin, Jaheim White, Dylan Edwards. So there's a lot in this class, but not a ton of people have popped. I think that probably the worst, I want to say the worst one. That's a bad language there. I don't know what I was thinking there. Just the least inefficient this year, and probably the one that hurts the most this year is Caleb Jackson. Because a lot of people expected Caleb to be that guy. It looks like Caden Durham, a true freshman for LSU, has kind of popped off and taken over that spot from him. So that's a huge one there. But as a whole, when you look at the running backs here, what do you notice about these guys? Because there's hope here with this class. Like, it's not gloom and doom, but we do have to have a lot of production from a lot of other guys going into next year.
Yeah, I'd say the one that really pops off to me is Darius Taylor, because he's the one that's hitting on a lot of these metrics. And Jeremiah Love, there's some interesting things. I think we're going to profile these two guys. There's some interesting things that have happened for him this year. Justice Hayes had just this last game had a really, really nice game, and it kind of showed what the potential is there for him. So, these 4 guys, CJ Baxter, I think has a lot of potential as well. And, it's unfortunate about the injury, but there's some real hope there. And even in the best of the rest, there's some guys that there's some nuggets of like, there's hope in here as well. But I'm excited about some of these guys here in this class, and I do think this will be somewhat similar to the quarterbacks. I do think there'll probably be some guys from the 2025 class that decide to forego the draft and jump into this class, and that make this class a little bit stronger too as well.
You guys are learning Jay's ever an optimist. He really is. Where I'm more of the pessimistic, like, gosh, we got to get some production out of these boys. Like, let's go. Like, we got to see it here. Jay is ever an optimist with these guys here. We're not going to profile Justice Haynes. The one thing I will say about Justice Haynes, he just always looks different when he gets the football. Now, one thing he's not like he's been terrible this year. He doesn't get a ton of carries, right? He's basically this is his last 5 games. 6 carries, 6, 8, 8, 8. And his last game, he had 8 carries, 79 yards, and a touchdown. If he got more volume, I think he'd be better. Like 55 carries, 350 yards, 5 touchdowns. So for me, he's only had 55 carries this year. Like, to me, I really feel like this is an offensive thing, not so much a Justice Haynes thing. I still think he's talented. But as Jay will know, production does matter for these boys. So especially when the metrics come. So he's got to see that at some point. We got to see him get on the field and get more than that, get the 15, 20 carries there. Now, we're not going to highlight him, but we are going to highlight this kid, Darius Taylor. I've been pretty high on Darius Taylor going into the season. I like Darius Taylor a lot. I put him on my list before the season. I said, hey, this is a player that could rise. He had a really good freshman year until he got injured. He had the 6 games, 138 attempts, 799 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And in this year, 7 games, 104 attempts, 513 yards, and 7 touchdowns there. He's looked pretty good. And the catching, right? The receiving, 34 receptions, 257 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's what stands out to me about Darius Taylor, because if he can prove he's a 3-down guy, that's going to vault him up the board. That's going to get up to the rankings, because now we're talking about, hey, we have a 3 back. Oh gosh, I can't say it. 3-down back here. Like, is that what we have? Because if we have that, then that's where we get excited about from a fantasy standpoint, because he can be on the field more. What did the numbers say for you, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, not only is he doing well this year, he also did well his first year. So all of those age-adjusted metrics that we look for, he did really well that first year as well. So it's a continuation. It's proving the whole story out here that Darius Taylor's having another great season. So in 2024, just some quick numbers here. 73.4 yards per game, rush yards per game, 110 scrimmage yards per game. So quite a bit of those yards per game coming from the receiving game, which is really nice to see from a back. You talked about 3-down back, but having that receiving potential is sort of what you're looking for a fantasy running back going forward. So really good. 0.26 missed tackles forced per attempt, which is pretty good. And like I said, the receiving piece is 15% target share as a running back. Really good. Nearly 20% reception share for him this year. And he's got a great dominator rating. So Darius Taylor this year is having a really, really good season from all these age-adjusted metrics, and looks like the guy of this class. If you're gonna go straight by the data, this guy did well in year 1 and is now doing well in year 2. And this is a really good profile so far for Darius Taylor. So I'm really excited about this profile. 215 is nothing to slouch out from a running back. 29 BMI, that's great. Pretty high elusive rating, really good PFF rush grade. This is a good profile, and I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think he also, not just from the number standpoint, from a film base, he stands out really well. I mean, I think his production's there. As a true freshman, he was a 3-star kid. So you're thinking 3-star guy. I know that some people say, in terms of what their recruiting rating was, but he came out ready to go. I mean, he was very, very good there. Surprising burst, like to the outside. He does that pretty well. I think he can play big, as you saw. So from a film-based perspective, he does a very, very good job. So I think for me, in a class that's kind of, like when we're thinking of it, like what do we like with these guys and what do we don't? He's shown up more than Justice Haynes, right? So like maybe we should have those guys flipped just based on what they've been able to put on the field. I think we still do a potential, but potential is a dangerous road, as me and Jay know very, very well as they're out there, our misses. But the other guy who I think, we got to give a shout out, unfortunately, to Christian Williams. Every once in a while, we have to say how good of a job he's done, is Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame. And he was, I think, Christian's 2 or 1. Coming into the season, he loved Jeremiah Love. And I did not mean to do that, by the way. But he was a big fan of him. 6 foot, 210, 215 out of Notre Dame this year. 89 attempts, 564 yards, 9 touchdowns, over 100 yards receiving, and another receiving touchdown. But he's really kind of been Notre Dame's guy, and he's definitely been explosive. You like what you've seen from him, and Notre Dame has a history of kind of putting out some good backs. Like when we think of like what production, Kyron Williams comes to mind, obviously, and like guys that just can play. They're going to score fantasy points. They're going to score, and they can lean on him. And they've leaned on him a little bit. They haven't had to really utilize him too much against Navy. They really he had a big game, 12 carries, 102 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But pretty good profile so far. You like what you see from him. You want a little bit more, but what do the numbers tell us for Jeremiah Love?
Yeah, I actually have him as 210 pounds, so 28.5 BMI. I'd love to see him get up to 215, which I like. But going by the Notre Dame's roster versus going by PFF, you never know how it is. What the thing that stands out this year from him is the missed tackles force. That all leads into an elusive rating, and it's really, really good this year. So he's at 0.47 missed tackles force per attempt, which is second to Jamarian Wilcox in Kentucky, who has about half the amount of carries or the attempts that Jeremiah Love has. So the clearly leading in missed tackles force per attempt this season, and it's really stood out in all of college football. This is one that popped in the early games this season, and it's stayed consistent. He's been just forcing a lot of tackles. That leads to an elusive rating of 22.6 for PFF, 222.6. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if it's 22.6, that's my lazy ass, fat ass elusive rating out here. Like that would not be good.
I can't even get the number out. 226.7 elusive rating, which is third in NCAA behind Ashton Genty, of course, and Brandon Thomas from Memphis. And he's also 9th in PFF rush grade. So in a class where like you don't have a lot of guys that are standing at the top of a lot of these statistical categories, here's Jeremiah Love leading in missed tackles force per attempt, the elusive rating, at PFF rush grades. He's very high. So this is a good season that he's having. The analytic dots and stuff like that could be a little bit better, and we'd love to see more production next year. But honestly, this is a really good profile that does seem to be popping on those particular metrics. And missed tackles force per attempt is actually something that does translate into the NFL, especially at the competition level that he's at. So I love to see that, and the fact that he has such a high number is really good. And if that continues this year and into next year, that's something that's good. I mean, one of the guys that we had a couple of years ago, Javonte Williams, you can talk about his career, how that shaped up, but like that's something that popped from him, and now we're seeing that out of Jeremiah Williams. And Javonte Williams, he had Jeremiah Love. Javonte Williams, he had pretty good draft capital. So we're going to see that now out of Jeremiah Love. That'll probably translate to pretty good draft capital again if that continues. So I think I like this. I like this profile. I like what he's doing this year. It looks good. Sorry about all the stumbling on that one.
If you're on the clock, who you drafting? Jeremiah Love or Darius Taylor? Don't tell me wide receiver. Don't be that dude. Don't be that guy.
Right now it's Darius Taylor because he had such a good year one.
Yeah.
That it sort of specs out, and then you have the receiving piece of that as well. So you have the receiving element as well. The other thing that I'd add to that is the rush yards are expected for a career. Darius Taylor is just like sort of straight up over his career. Jeremiah Love is kind of hugging that 0 line. So he's still positive for his career, but he's hugging that 0 line. So, there's a lot of these metrics. Darius Taylor got above the metrics for years 1 and 2, where Jeremiah Love is just year 2. Darius Taylor has the receiving, like the extremely high receiving production this year. And then if you just look at the straight rush yards are expected for his career, Darius Taylor is much higher than Jeremiah Love, who seems to be hugging around 0. Still positive, still good, but just not what Darius Taylor has been able to do for his career so far.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. I think that's fine. I think the key question is, what does CJ Baxter do? You should expect CJ Baxter to probably come out a little slower next year. Might be a buy window if you play any type of college format, Devy format, or anything like that. But I do think still CJ Baxter has the upside to be the running back 1 in the class. He looked very, very good as a freshman, a true freshman at Texas. So that is the one caveat. Ruben Owens is out there too. He didn't look as good. So I think that's the one question mark there, is like CJ is still there. But let's get depressing. Let's talk about the 2025 wide receivers. So let's go into kind of these guys and where we have these guys. And really, I'm gonna tell you right now, these top four you can mix them however the hell you want. I just really put them on the graphic here if you're on YouTube. Casey Concepcion, I guess at 1, could be at 4 though, or could be off. I think, he had some good production last year. This year, I mean, the numbers look okay. We're going to get into him. We're going to talk about him. I'll tell you who I think, and I just did a big update in my rankings. Carnell Tate to me is my 1. So Carnell Tate to me is my wide receiver 1 of the 2026 class. I'm a pretty big fan of him from Ohio State. He was Jeremiah Smith before Jeremiah Smith got to Ohio State. He was the big get for them in a recruiting cycle. He's kind of turned on the last couple of games, so that's fun to watch. I do think Carnell could be the guy in that class. Zachariah Branch, we've talked about him multiple times, so we're not going to get into deep details on him deeply here, but struggled. He needs to find another team. I'm going to hammer that home, transfer somewhere else, Zachariah Branch. Eugene Wilson's been okay, but it's been a bad offense. It's been bad quarterback play. What is Florida? They've been kind of banged up. There's some questions there. As far as the best of the rest, there's a lot of guys in the same tier. Jonte Cook II, he's looked okay. Mekhi Lemon, he's looked okay. Deuce Robinson, I think, is an interesting one from USC because he's kind of the hybrid tight end / wide receiver. Jacoby Lane, also, if you notice that's 3 straight USC guys, and they still are bottom 4th of the Big Ten. So shout out Lincoln Riley out there. Eric Singleton Jr. from Georgia Tech. Noah Rogers, Brandon Ennis. I still have faith, Brandon Ennis from Ohio State. Jalen Hale is coming off. He's still injured for Alabama. There is a chance Jalen Hale next year has it. Nick Harbor from South Carolina, super freak. Then we have J.C. Brown at Kansas State, Malachi Coleman, but a lot of shrugs from me and Jay here because as a whole, there's a lot of question marks here. The shrugness tells me how you feel, but tell the listeners, how are you feeling about this class as a whole?
Not great, honestly. There's a few guys that, are kind of hitting some of these metrics, but really it looks like another, I mean, we said it about the QBs. We love Arch Manning. We said it about the running backs. There's a couple of guys. Now we're saying it may be even worse for the wide receivers here. So I just wish there were a couple guys in this group that have production that matches. Now that J.C. Brown and Eric Singleton Jr. are guys that have production in year 2 that looks pretty good. Carnell Tate has a great EPA per play in year 2. But is sort of missing on reception yards per team pass attempt. Yeah. And then Casey Concepcion had a really good first year and is having a just okay second year. I mean, there was one game that was in prime time that, he caught a bunch of touchdowns with that everybody went crazy for, but really these last few games have not been as good. So it's really a shrug your shoulders type of class. Mm-hmm. There's so much potential behind Zachariah Branch. Oh my gosh. Maybe it's just the new situation or what it is, but I really would love to see him start putting up the numbers, the production to make it work. And I think I agree with you. I think Carnell Tate is the guy that I would like to focus on because I think he might be the guy of this class for the 2026 class.
Well, hey, you're the man. So let's talk about it. So this year, 6 games. Last year did okay. He had 18 catches, 264, and a touchdown. Carnell Tate's a true sophomore, 5'11". What are you thinking of him? 6'3", 191. I do not know why the graphic says that on there. 6'3", 191 there. So he is much bigger than that. That's a graphic fail. That's my fail there. But what do you notice about him? You're the Ohio State fan. You're the guy. You're the dude. So what do you notice about Carnell Tate?
So the numbers don't really say the story of what you get out of Carnell Tate. Right now you have Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Will Howard, who seems to be fairly accurate, but really hasn't focused on Carnell Tate very much. The focus has been towards Jeremiah Smith, and maybe deservedly so. But the thing is, that's really tough for programs like Ohio State in the wide receiver room is the ball is going to get spread around. And so you have sort of these teammate exceptions type of things where everybody's good. Maybe Jeremiah Smith is slightly better than Carnell Tate overall as Devy prospects, but that doesn't mean Carnell Tate is terrible. So if you get a comment like he's not even the best wide receiver on the team or something like that, that doesn't really mean anything because what the real evaluation is he going to be a good NFL prospect? Yeah. And I think what we're seeing from Carnell Tate is that he's going to be a good NFL prospect. And it stinks because you don't see it as him being the best wide receiver on his team, but he doesn't have to be. he can be the third best wide receiver on his team and still be a really good NFL wide receiver, just because of the program that Ohio State has. So just some nuggets from this season so far. 11.2 target share, right? So Emeka and Jeremiah Smith are eating in this offense. They have the most of the targets. He only has 11.2 target share. He has 56 reception yards per game, 14 targets per route run, and 0.08 first downs per route run. You'd love to see that closer to 0.1. A 0.16 weighted dominator, 1.89 reception yards per team pass step. And this is the good nugget, right? He has a really high EPA per play. Actually, if you throw it up on the chart, those age adjusted charts for that metric, it's like very, very high. So that means that he's being really good when he's getting it involved in the game. He's adding a lot of value to Ohio State's team. And so that nugget is there. What I would notice is in the last few games, it feels like Will Howard is targeting him a little bit more. This last particular game, he's hitting Carnell Tate a little bit more often. And so looking Carnell Tate's a little bit more. So the hope is that he gets a little bit more share from 11% to something a little bit higher than that target share here for the rest of the season. And if we could just get that reception yards, those yards for him up a little bit higher, he doesn't need to catch all the touchdowns or whatever. That can go to Jeremiah Smith or whatever, but just love to see him get some more of yards. And then I'd be even higher on him as a prospect. But it really is that discussion really comes down to, like, yes, he might not be the best wide receiver on Ohio State's team, but if Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver we've seen in forever, and Emeka Egbuka is a first-round NFL wide receiver, why can't Carnell Tate also be a first-round NFL wide receiver, just slightly different than those guys? The other thing I'd mention, 6'3", 191, that's a good NFL wide receiver profile from a size perspective. Yeah. If he can get up to 195, that'd be even better. I'd love to see that. Maybe even above 200. But honestly, 6'3", that's a really good wide receiver profile. When he was coming into Ohio State, as a freshman, and he was getting on the field and playing a little bit as a freshman, people were comparing him to as the next Marvin Harrison. Yeah. So Jeremiah Smith, maybe the best ever to do it. Who knows how that all plays out? But if Carnell ends up being the next Marvin Harrison Jr., or maybe it's like 75 or 80% of what Marvin Harrison Jr. is, still an incredible, an excellent wide receiver, and I think the potential is there. So that's why I'd say that.
I think him and Jeremiah Smith are going to be freaking fantastic down the stretch, but I think next year is where you're going to see Tate's value go up there. And yeah, like I said, YouTube, don't get mad at me. I know it says 5'11". He's 6'3", 191. He's a massive boy. And definitely the numbers are there. I think, and again, you know who performs well in the NFL? You know who gets drafted first round in the NFL? Ohio State wide receivers, and especially guys that get on the field. And when you're noticing from the last couple games, you see the thing that I've watched, and I've begrudgingly hated watching these games because I hate Ohio State, and I was hoping they were going to lose Nebraska, but those Corn Huskers could not take care of business. Dylan Raiola, we'll talk about you at some point. You just notice that, like, hey, when the games get tight or even at different moments, hey, they weren't afraid to go to Tate, right? Like, that's something to note on a team that has national championship aspirations of a guy like, hey, no, we're going to get him involved. I'm still a believer there. I really think that he can definitely move up. And I think he's a buy. I think he can go out there and get him. I think he's one of those guys that can rise up, because when you're looking at this 2026 class, this is why we do this, the wide receivers, it's kind of gross. So, the guy's potential, plays for one of the best teams in the country, plays for one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country, best wide receiver coach who develops first round wide receivers. That's Ohio State. That's Carnell Tate. There's a lot of boxes to check there. Now, talking about Casey Concepcion, though, it's a little bit of a different profile. He's the 5'11", 187. I see what I did there. Wide receiver out of NC State. Has kind of had an up and down year, right? 43 receptions on 67 targets, 365 yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. But like you mentioned, you're going to go into, we talked a little bit of pre-show, the numbers really tell a different story of, like, he's kind of had a down year, right? Like, he's kind of really been struggling here. And so what do we take away from KC Concepcion? Because a lot of guys that like him, Offense has been tough. He's been playing with a true freshman quarterback in Bailey. At the same time, Grayson McCall is supposed to come there and revamp this offense. He just had to medically retire due to a concussion. So there's been some context around his season, but what are you noticing about his numbers?
I would say that he's still getting a tremendous amount of the share of the offense. And when it comes to those type of metrics, I still like that. It's not where I want to see it yet, and it's kind of fallen off a little bit, but he's got a 26.4% target share. So that's pretty good. 29.29 targets per route run. Again, like he has a good share of the offense when he's playing on the field. Some of the things that are kind of a little concerning for me, the yards per route run at 1.57. Love to see that up over 2, maybe even higher than that. He is mostly a slot guy, so 5'11", 187. That does feel like a very slot profile, and you have to figure is he's something special in the slot, or is that just the way that he's being used? At 64.5 PFF receiving grade is pretty low, for somebody that we're hoping to be one of the better guys in the class. So those are tough ones. The point that I'd make is, the ADOT, it fell from 8.5 last year to now 6.3 this year. And his yards per reception is not very high either. So it's an 8.5 yards per reception. So is that a very viable NFL type profile? I'm not sure. It's definitely giving me some warning signs, especially with the 1.57 yards per route run. It's definitely giving me some warning signs of like, is this really an NFL profile? But there's been flashes, like the start of the season. There's, he had that 3 touchdown game in prime time, and there's a lot like that, and he's a big part of the offense. So he gets to be a big part of this offense. So there are things to like, but there are some flashing lights here that we just need to, I guess, keep track of, and then hopefully that does change. And you mentioned the QB issues going on right now, so hopefully next year, that sort of works itself out, and you get a better year next year. But a little bit of a fall off from that 9 receptions, 121 yards, and 3 touchdown performance you saw against Western Carolina that first week. So
huge fall there. The one thing I would say is, like, transfer, man, go somewhere else. Like, just go somewhere, not Florida State. Don't go to Florida State. Whatever you do, I don't know what's going on there. But you maybe transfer somewhere else. I do think that, like, we talked about it. So I mentioned to the listeners, like, the big thing for me is, like, there's a lot of guys that look like this, that have this profile and that can do this. And so when you think of, like, the difference between him and Tate's profile is a lot different, right? Like, he probably should have been our wide receiver 1 on there as we're working through this. But that's why we do this, because it's still early. So, hey, what do we see here from these guys? What's the profile look like? And so that's probably what worries me the most. But he's still talented. He definitely has talent. He's definitely explosive. It shows up on tape. Now, the thing is, I think that to be a difference maker at the wide receiver position in the slot, you have to show that next level. And that's where he's got to get to. He's going to be able to create that separation. He's going to demand a target share like he's been doing. Is he going to be able to do those things there? But overall, a lot of work to be done there, wide receivers in the 26 class. And I think a big reason why, if we think about it off the top of our head, those of you guys out there that are degenerates like us, Jurion Dickey has not panned out at Oregon. Probably going to have to transfer, can't see the field. Hakeem Williams, bad offense at Florida State, but just hasn't been that guy. Those 2 guys were one of the top 5 group too. Like, when you think of that guys coming in, so the top of the class is not really panned out. You got to kind of remember too, this is kind of COVID-ish years, like the with the recruiting and like the development, all of those things. So there's a lot of things that goes into this class as a whole. We're not going to spend a ton. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the tight ends, but I wanted to at least give some tight ends love. Luke Haas is Jay's guy. He loves that guy. Lawson Lucky's looked pretty good from Georgia. Andrew Rappel, he has not played yet, but when you look at Davis Warren, or he hasn't really produced that much yet. When you look at Davis Warren, you're like, hey, Penn State tight end, I'm putting him in my top 5. That's how it works there. Kenyon Sadiq is a good one. I think that's how you say his name, from Oregon. Very athletic. Kind of checks the boxes there from athleticism metric. But overall, I mean, you could talk about your love fest for Luke Haas if you like, Jay. But really, tight end class, there's so many guys that pop off later. I'm not really going to draft him anyway.
Yeah, I like Luke Haas, but I was hoping for a much better season or start to the season so far. There's still time to go, and I think this last game he had a couple good catches, so I'm excited about. I really like Sadiq out of
Hmm.
Oregon. I think he's had some chances to prove his potential out this year at Oregon. He's the second guy behind Terrence Ferguson, but he's really looked actually really good this season. So I'm excited about what he has. And then finally, there's a guy that's not on the list, Benjamin Brahmer at Iowa State,
Hmm.
who's also interesting as well. But yeah, I mean, Luke Haas and Sadiq and Lucky and Andrew are the guys that look the best probably so far in this class or have the most potential. So like you said, really comes down to draft capital and athleticism and a couple other factors. Usually, we don't have a ton of production at the tight ends through this, at least at this point in their careers. So, some exciting potential, but I don't see Brock Bowers here yet. I don't see that type of guy in this class here so far from
No.
what we've seen.
No, I don't think we're ever going to see Brock Powers again. I don't know if that's ever going to happen again. All right, what I want to do is we're going to get to wrap this episode up. Talk about the 2026 first and kind of where they're valued. I'm going to go through some trades that I found out there in various leagues and on Fantasy Calc and some other places. But right now, generally speaking, now this is all market value based in your leagues, right? So 2026 first, early to late are they're pretty much in the same tier for the most part. Now, we have these same values in our rankings that we have for our trade calculator. We kind of go through it. So if you want more in detail rankings and everything, you can find on our Patreon. But this is very generic. Hey, who are some players going for straight up first? So Justin Herbert's been floated out there for early first, mid first there. DK Metcalf coming off, he's still injured. So there's still an injury base there. Rashee Rice, which his value's been all over the place. I mean, I have the dynasty investor sitting across from me, so he knows that. Devonta Smith, back and forth. Eagles offense has kind of been a mess there. A.J. Brown is definitely the target share has been there more than Devonta. Anthony Richardson, man, I mean, he checked himself out of a game today. He said, I'm out. I'm tired of running. He said, I got to take a break. So that I think is the one, like, man, you can take a shot at Anthony Richardson. But again, just talking about the class as a whole, if it's a late first from a 2026 first perspective, you might want to buy some of these guys and just ride them out, right? There's still 2 years out. There's still a little bit of maneuverability you can do. Some of that last two guys I saw kind of go for a 26 first straight up. Tank Dell and JSN. Now, I'm not saying Justin Herbert went for a straight up first. You probably have to throw in something else in there. But generally speaking, these are some players getting valued around that 26 value. Is anything wrong, Mr. Investor? You do the investor series. Do you feel like anything's wrong in that area?
I'd say that the takeaway here is for me is that the 2026 class from a pick perspective is very high risk, high reward, and there's a lot of question marks about who you're actually going to be selecting in that 2026 class.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, which is interesting because it really hasn't been this way the last few years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. This really does feel like a start to finish sort of like a not as great class. So if you're able to parlay some of these 2026 picks into actual NFL production through guys like Justin Herbert or DK Metcalf or Rashee Rice, I kind of be interested in that. Also, something to think about is, maybe there's a few guys you like in the 2025 class, or you want to push these picks out to the 2027 class. I'm not sure if you're like really ready to start doing that, or if 2026 picks are at their peak value at the moment. They might get through the 2025 draft class and into the summer. They might be more along the lines of where the peak, or getting high enough to be trade values. I'd say you could move those for the players, or move those into the other years, so 2025s or 2027s, as a strategy, as something you can do. But right now, what I'd be kind of do is I'd be trying to take these 2026 and moving and make them players or something like that. But this seems about right in terms of value, about where they should be. Guys like Justin Herbert jump off this list. If you can get Justin Herbert for a 2020 2026 first. Man, I guess the only player that I would be really hesitant at losing out on is Arch, and even Arch Manning is the guy that we were talking about could be there for the 2027 class. He'd stay for his 4th year. So even that is the case where, if you get that early 2026 first, it could be somebody that you'd be hoping for, but he might not even be in the class. So I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think the way I look at 26 first too right now, I don't buy like a Derrick Henry with a 26 first. Like my rule is, if I'm a contender and I want to buy, with a 26 first, I want. Now, it's not guaranteed, right? Like, it's not going to be guaranteed out there. Like, I just saw in a news update, Christian Kirk's out for the year with a broken collarbone. So, had you bought him, now you're missing that production for that year or whatever the case may be. But I always look for players that I expect for 2 years of production. If I move a first, I want someone that's going to produce for me next year. All right, like, hey, I'm gonna definitely get this at least next year, and then possibly the full following year, right? So guys like this list: Devonta, Rasheed, Metcalf, Tank, JSN, those guys to me are all going to probably produce for 2 years, right? Now they can miss. They always have these possibilities of like, oh, doesn't pan out, or quarterbacks, right? But I very rarely will move a first for a running back. I'm going to be very, very real with you there, unless it's like that initial first. If I know it's going to be late, because how many times have you seen in your leagues, in leagues where guys move a 2-year out first thinking, oh, I'm going to be a contender. Injuries decimate their roster, and then their first turns into Arch Manning for Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins or one of these guys that you're just like, dang it, why did I move that? Brian Robinson, for example, from this year, or even Derrick Henry, right? Maybe Derrick. Now, if they win your league, you're fine. You'll be like, hey, I'm good with it. But we've seen those weeks. You're like, oh man, that is terrible there. So I think that's kind of my rule there. Now, there are some deals here. I'm going to go through some deals for 26 first that we've seen. And then we're just going to pick up one from each subgroup, and you tell me, Jay, what you like or don't like about it. But 26 first and a second for George Pickens. That was a deal. These are all 12-team Superflex, tight end premium. I think it's like 1.75 PPR. 26 first, Gabe Davis for Jaden Reed. I can't believe Gabe Davis is still getting moved out there. Brian Thomas Jr. and a first for Jamar Chase, which I thought was interesting there. Of those deals there, just pick one. I know you like to pick multiple, but which one stands out to you? Like, you love both sides or kind of an overpay on one side? Where are you at there?
I think the one that's the most interesting, like the other ones I could take and leave, but the one that's really interesting to me is Brian Thomas and a 2026 first for Jamar Chase. What's interesting to me is that Brian Thomas looks really, really good. Mm-hmm. And I do think that Jamar Chase is maybe a little bit undervalued for what he is right now. If you look out in the trade market, Justin Jefferson is like probably one of the highest valued assets in all of Dynasty Fantasy Football. And I think Jamar Chase has some of the same potential as what Justin Jefferson is, but he's being valued at a much lower cost. But then Brian Thomas just coming on this year, and he looks really, really good. And so I think he's one of those guys that could be a top 12 wide receiver as well. So you're getting a top 12 wide receiver and a first for another top 12 wide receiver. That's pretty interesting to me. I can't even tell you which side I like. I just think it's a really cool trade. I like both sides, and it could be good for both sides of the deal. It's a really interesting one. The other ones, like Gabe Davis, whatever, George Pickens and Jaden Reed, I think have a lot of potential, but whatever as well. But we talked about what those 2026 firsts are, and maybe they're not as valuable as maybe what they have been in the past. Say 2025 picks have been, or 2024 picks have been. So it's just kind of interesting to see how those play out. But yeah, the one that's really interesting to me is Brian Thomas Jr. Which way would you lean? Would you go Brian Thomas Jr. in a first, or would you go Jamar Chase?
Give me Jamar. I always take the elite assets. It's a fun debate, and I think with Kirk going down now, and then Jacksonville kind of reshifting itself, I do think Brian Thomas could be the wide receiver one there. And then you get a first. Like, if that's a top end first, and you get another guy, there's a risk there. Yeah. Give me Jamar, though, man. Give me that top guy. Give me that top 3 wide receivers position. I'm all aboard there. And the other subgroup I found, Saquon Barkley in a first for Bijan, which I think is fun. I think that is an interesting deal there. Xavier Worthy in a first for Devonta, and in a 26 first straight up for Dak Prescott, which I don't know. We're recording this during the Cowboy game. I'm not watching it yet. I'm not going to turn it on, but this might sway if I had looked and seen if we're getting our ass kicked by the Niners tonight. But what deal stands out to you? To me, it's the first deal. I think that's a fascinating deal there. Saquon's looked really good. Get that first back. I mean, I love Bijan. I love moving forward, but for this year, I think it's a fun deal for both sides. After that, yeah, the pick comes into play.
Yeah, and the Xavier Worthy, Devonta Smith one, it's like, why are we even doing that?
Yeah.
I can understand if you need like production now and you want the Devonta, but it really doesn't feel like a much of anything. And then the first for a Dak, that makes sense if you need the quarterback. Quarterbacks that'll get you points, that'll be first, and like we said, he'll have a couple more years of production. So you kind of feel okay buying for one first. You'd love for it to be something different than a first, but that's what it is, and that seems okay. And like you said, Saquon and a first for Bijan is like the one that's super interesting, just like Brian Thomas the first for Jamar Chase. That's like one where on both sides you win. Both sides you can have winners depending on your situation. So I like those types of trades. It's really interesting. Makes a lot of sense. The other two, like the first for a QB, that makes sense. It doesn't have to be Dak Prescott. It could have been anybody really, as long as they have the potential to help you win. And then the Xavier Worthy, Devonta Smith, it really, that one is just a why are we even doing that type of thing for Devonta Smith. If it was a Xavier Worthy and a 2021 for a wide receiver one,
like Nico,
like
or
something
top 10 guy.
Yeah, something like that. Then yeah, for sure. But Devonta is awesome. He scores you points, but he's a wide receiver 2 guy. So let's not give up 2 firsts, because I think it took a first to get Xavier Worthy last year, and that don't sunk cost me or whatever and all that stuff. But and Xavier Worthy still might end up being something, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of guy. But they two basically firsts for Devonta Smith is not something I'd be interested in.
Well, I wanted to show you guys, out there and your listeners out there, you can use those first plus an asset to go get a dude like Jamar Chase, like Bijan Robinson, if that's what you believe in. And right now with the class like in any normal scenario, I would take Saquon in the first for Bijan because it's running back. And you're just like, hey, I get the off ramp for the running back. They're both top 5 guys. But with the caveat of like this 26th class, like we just went through, there's a lot of question marks out there. Now, what I would say is you don't have to keep it. You can buy 26 first right now and then move them as the season goes. And that does provide you capital. So you take Saquon in a first, then you flip that first for somebody else as well. Like there's ways to do that, but you got to be super active, and just be active on the trade market and going through it there. All right. Well, that's the show. We talked about 2026 class, gave you guys a little bit of insight of what we're seeing. But remember, when we're thinking of this class, we did not take any guys coming back that we think could come back. We just strictly took the 2026 class. So there is definitely holes to fill, and we hope some of them get filled there, and that so that we can see the talent there. But as a whole, that's what the 2026 class looks like right now. We appreciate you as always tuning in and giving some love out there on YouTube and the podcast. We appreciate that support. We'll see you guys next week.